Stream this evening with myself, Dr. Natalie Whitehead. I'm one of the co-founders and co-directors of Exeter Science Centre, and I'm joined this evening by Michelle Bieger from the University of Exeter, who is an Astrophysics PhD candidate, as well as a software engineer. And we're here today to chat about AI, ChatGPT, and basically try to understand what it is and the implications that it has for all of us. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
Well, we're really, it's going to be a really nice opportunity to basically have a bit of a chat. We're really keen that you send us your questions, so please do that in the live chat, and we'll do our best to get through them. I've got some questions to start, actually, Michelle. So we'll get started. So Michelle, you're not only a software engineer, but you're an astrophysics kind of PhD candidate. Can you tell us a little bit about your research? What are you actually doing at the university?
Yeah, so my kind of specialty or niche, I guess, is that I look at the light coming from exoplanets and try to tell through that light what kind of atmosphere they have. I use some tools that they themselves use machine learning, so that's kind of how I got peripherally into this. And then I also teach at the university as well, which is also how I got into learning more about ChatGPT.
Fantastic. Oh, it's great to hear. It's nice that you're kind of, using this technology in the work that you're doing as a PhD student. And as well, you're working at Digilab in Exeter and then moving to a full-time role there. Is that right? What does that involve?
So currently I'm a software engineer there, and it's a small startup in Exeter, down by the quay, and they have this machine learning tool that they've developed that's a little bit different from all the machine learning tools, and that they've got kind of uncertainty quantifications that go along with the tool, so they can tell you just how off their model is compared to, I guess, reality. And that's kind of new and innovative. So that is something that they're developing, and I work as a software engineer trying to get that tool to our clients in the most palatable way, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And I guess we can kind of maybe chat a little bit more if people are kind of interested in what that entails, the kind of more technical details. We can get to that as well. I know I can see there's a few people watching. Please do send in your questions in the live chat at any time. We'd like to hear what you'd like to hear. I suppose what would be really useful to kind of set the scene, because I'm aware, like, one of the reasons that we kind of organize this live stream, and you very kindly agreed, Michelle and Roger, next week. We arranged this because there's a lot of people that we've encountered through our events and through our activities who either haven't heard of ChatGPT, or they haven't had to go on it, and they're not really familiar with the really rapidly developing technology. So we thought this is a really nice opportunity to kind of set the baseline, make it nice and clear what it's all about, and we have some really nice perspectives from you, Michelle, and next week we'll be speaking to Roger Taylor as well about more perhaps the ethics and the implications societally. So I think it'd be a really nice opportunity, Michelle, if you wouldn't mind, to kind of give us a feel for what we mean by artificial intelligence. And you mentioned machine learning there. How does this all tie in? What is it all about?
Yeah, so machine learning and artificial intelligence are two terms that kind of get used interchangeably a lot of the time. So I'll start with machine learning, because that one was kind of like the first one, I guess, to come on the scene. So machine learning goes all the way back to like the 1950s, 1960s even. And it's basically the idea, it's literally what it says on the tin: a machine can learn. So basically you're trying to teach a computer something, and then it is able to do that process again without you interfering. So there's different types of machine learning, and yeah, so there's different types of machine learning. You can have there's like a couple different terms people might recognize if they're kind of in the sphere a little bit. So things like supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and semi-supervised learning. And these are different types of getting an algorithm, so kind of the equation that we use to speak to a computer back and forth, to kind of do things on its own, so that it kind of knows what we're the human looking for. And so then it can speak to the computer and get us a result back that we recognize. Yeah, so that is machine learning. And machine learning very quickly kind of spun out this other term, artificial intelligence. And so the idea was that if we could teach a computer to do something, and to teach it to do it on its own without us interfering furthermore, then can we create like a human brain, essentially, that is a computer. And from that kind of came the idea of artificial intelligence. Because, of course, there's a difference between learning something, which is just something that you do by rote, and intelligence, which is where you're able to pick new things up without someone telling you, or kind of critical thought on your own. So yeah, there's quite a divide in the community, I think, of computer scientists about this term. I prefer not to use the term artificial intelligence because I feel it's more of a philosophical idea, or like a kind of sci-fi concept, than necessarily like what we are able to do currently with technology. And of course, there's all sorts of philosophical debates about, like I said, what intelligence is and whether a machine can ever have that. So yeah, artificial intelligence is a very broad term that encompasses many different kind of genres, whereas machine learning is more like a computer science or a scientific term to acknowledge how we're speaking to computers and computers speaking back to us.
Cool. Okay, so from a kind of it's safer perhaps to use machine learning as, understanding the process that a machine is learning how to do tasks, sometimes really complex tasks. And we've seen, and we'll get to this, thinking what ChatGPT is capable of. But yeah, the artificial intelligence sounds a little bit like you say, we haven't really defined what intelligence is. We don't know whether it means kind of self-awareness or reflection, improvement, because machines, I suppose, including ChatGPT, can emulate that quite convincingly and make you think that they're intelligent or cognition. And I think we need to be careful with that. And this is something we can maybe discuss. So okay, so we've kind of clarified that artificial intelligence is a little bit of a loaded term, perhaps. So because people tend to refer to ChatGPT as an artificial intelligence, and I guess we can also think of it maybe as as just a chatbot that's very advanced. How would you define it? What is ChatGPT? Because it's a particular type of this kind of thing.
Yeah, so ChatGPT is a specific type of machine learning. It falls under the category of what we call large language models. So its whole goal, the thing that it models is language. And ChatGPT's job is to give you an answer. It doesn't matter whether that answer is true. It doesn't matter whether that answer makes sense. Its whole goal is just to fulfill this like algorithm it's been given, which says to it, you have to give me an answer. You have to give me language. And when I've been speaking to students about this, I found it really helpful to kind of compare it to Google, to kind of demonstrate how it works. So a lot of students use ChatGPT at the moment like Google, and I think a lot of people in general use it a bit like Google. So as you mentioned, it's kind of like a chatbot form. It looks like a chatbot. And you go in and you type stuff in, and it gives you 3 little dots as it's thinking, and it gives you an answer back. And so people feel like that's a bit like Google, except like instead of giving you a whole long list of links, it gives you what would the content be on that web page link that Google gives you. But there's quite a big technical difference between what these two things do. So Google is a bit like Inspector Clouseau from Pink Panther, is what I always say. You tell Inspector Clouseau, I want to look for the Pink Panther, and he goes to the internet and looks for things that match the Pink Panther's footprint, and he gives you those different results. And you then, as the user, make the choice of whether that result looks close enough to the Pink Panther to click on that or to not click on it. Whereas ChatGPT, I was liken a bit to Nunu from the Teletubbies, which
I'm loving these analogies.
um, I was devastated when I realized my students didn't even watch the Teletubbies. They had no idea what I was talking about. So if you haven't seen the Teletubbies, basically Nunu's like a big Hoover. He hoovers up loads of language, and then you ask it something, and it spits it back. It spits out the language that it thinks matches your query. And that might not necessarily be accurate. It may not be true. It's just, sucking up loads of language and then spitting out what it thinks is relevant. And so it does that by like mathematical pairing. So it's been given loads of data from the internet, and it kind of maps out statistically how likely a word is placed to the word before it. So therefore, which word comes next. It's kind of just a big game of statistics. So yeah, that's kind of like the key thing that makes ChatGPT work.
When you explain it like that, it kind of sounds really scary, because really it could just, if you've ever done, predictive text and things. I know that's a really basic and not, trained version, but it just seems as if it could go in any direction. And I think you make a really good point there about the fact that, you've got to be the one understanding whether it's correct or not. It's not necessarily thinking, even though it has this really great, way of making you think that it is
Yeah.
thinking. But it's not really kind of, I don't know, self-correcting, or is it? I don't know how
No.
complex is it?
Yeah, so it's not self-correcting at all, and it's also not. I think it now has this disclaimer on the bottom now that it's not connected to the internet, so it can't like cross correlate the answers that it gives with stuff from the internet. So you really are getting just kind of a statistical representation of language rather than yeah.
But it was trained on the internet originally, right?
Yes.
Before 2021, is that right?
Yeah. So you'll notice as well that a lot of its output has a very particular writing style. And a lot of people have attributed that to the fact that it's mainly been trained on, like, if you think about what the internet consists of, it consists a lot of Wikipedia. It's kind of like a really big source of the internet. And it's a lot of where the words of the internet lie. And so, yeah, it will sound quite a little bit formal, a little bit scientific, and that is because a lot of it has been trained on Wikipedia and on free articles from scientists, because that's like a lot of what the majority of the internet, in terms of the written word, consists of.
Has it been trained on everything else as well? I mean, because you tend to just think it's literally just being fed the internet, and of course, like you're saying, there are good things on the internet like Wikipedia and scientific articles, things like that. But also there's a lot of negative things on the internet as well, and I suppose there's a lot of biases and all sorts of bad things on there.
Yeah,
Being trained on
absolutely.
those too.
Yeah, so absolutely. So yeah, so it's trained on essentially, it's very similar to the database that's consists of. It's called Common Crawl. It's basically a way of archiving the internet that people set up a while ago. It's a nonprofit organization, and their whole idea was that they wanted to archive the internet, just for like freedom of speech and that sort of thing. And they use that, a very similar database to that, essentially. So it's everything that's publicly available on the internet. So if you're hidden behind like a private account, likely those words haven't been used to train ChatGPT. But yeah, so a lot of it is anything that's on the internet is available for grabs. And yes, it does result in a lot of bias. So it's also because it's like English is quite like that in and of itself. The fact that it's all in English is in and of itself quite a large bias. If you think
Yeah.
about like, what languages we use on the internet, it's mainly like Western world dominated, mainly English dominated. So a lot of like the content is all based on English language. So that in and of itself is like a bias just from the offset. But yeah, there's also lots of other biases in terms of like gender bias in terms of like some of the outputs that it has. So maybe not necessarily the training is biased, but a lot of the outputs it does can be quite biased. So, for example, there was a case where ChatGPT was asked something, and when it answered, it attributed, it spat out quite a lot of like a significant portion of text that was remarkably similar to the opening paragraphs of a book. It then attributed the book and those words to like a a colleague of the author's that was male, and the author was female. So it's like erasing in that sense like this woman's work and attributing it to her male colleagues, which is already a problem in a lot of scientific fields, and then to have that exacerbated by ChatGPT is quite tricky when a lot of people are replacing ChatGPT or using ChatGPT in place of other like search engines like Google.
Yeah, it sounds as if, in the examples of what you're saying, it seems like we need to just be really quite careful, I guess. But, I suppose trying to recognize that even though it's putting things forward in quite an assertive and, confident way, and here's the information I've heard as well, that, links that it provides are not entirely trustworthy all the time, citations, references, and things. So it's taking it with a really good pinch of salt, and
Mhm.
you know, that's something that, yeah, the thing it's developing so quickly as well. The fact is, people aren't kind of trained to interface with it and just and take that information in a trustworthy way, which is, in a kind of reliable way that we can be sure of. So that is quite concerning. But yeah, so something I wanted to mention as well. We've not had, I don't think we've had any chats, any comments at the moment. So please do send in if you've got any thoughts, any responses, any questions that you'd like Michelle to answer for you. Please let us know. Just post them in the chat. And Alice, my amazing colleague and co-founder, is very kindly on the chat as well. So if you've got any questions, please do send those through to us. Yeah, I think we've kind of talked about some of the negative sides of ChatGPT, and of course there are some real concerns that maybe we'll end up getting back to as well, just because it's such a big topic. But maybe from the perspective of the kind of people who'll be using it day to day, and almost like you were saying with the students that have been using it, and just average people, what are the benefits? What could we use it for? Because there are lots of benefits and good uses for it. What kind of things are people using it for at the moment?
Yeah, so I think some of the most like interesting and great cases I've seen for it is in cases of helping differently abled students, or just, I say students, I mean anyone who's using it. Like, so if you're someone who struggles with like dyslexia or any other kind of like condition that prevents you from thinking very quickly or clearly about grammar and things like that. It can be really useful for a lot of people use it for rewriting or restructuring their sentences, and kind of using it as like a shortcut for that. I've heard from people who say that they have like ADHD or dyslexia, and find it really helpful for writing minutes up after a meeting, so that they don't have to go through and do it, which is like a task that would be quite onerous for them, kind of shortening these tasks. I've seen, again, people with ADHD. I have ADHD, this is why, or I'm being diagnosed for ADHD, this is why I know so many use cases about this. But I've seen people with ADHD that have used it for things like helping them structure their calendar, helping them to kind of negotiate, like just make tasks a little bit easier, that they would otherwise find much more onerous than someone who's neurotypical. And people who have English as a second language tend to find it helpful, again, for the same reasons: restructuring sentences, making sure everything's grammatically correct, especially if they're working to a specific brief, like if they need their work to be more concise or more clear or something like that. Yeah, I think those are the kind of the use cases we need to be thinking about going forward, in terms of there's lots of ethical implications of using ChatGPT, but if we were to think about what's positive and what we want to take forward from that, and maybe developing a not as unethical version to help people, I think those are the use cases we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And yeah, it's nice to think that it's kind of making people's lives a little bit easier, or it can do, it has the potential to. And certainly, in our situation, I've come across there's a really excellent kind of charity called Charity Excellence Framework, and they have developed a bid writer, so to write grant applications and things using ChatGPT. So it's, to kind of cut out that agonizing process of, oh, how can I get this down to, say, a 200-word count and things like that, rewording, resuggesting things. I've tried things out like that. And of course, like any bit of computer software, rubbish in means rubbish out. You have to give it some kind of prompt, and it's kind of good at rewording things or suggesting alternatives. You can say things like, can you make it more formal, or could you make it more conversational, or whatever, if you're drafting an email. Things like that are really interesting. And yeah, if it could be used to make our lives a little bit easier, and you hope to save us all time, because certainly for me it takes a long time to write emails sometimes, and thinking about wording things carefully, or in a kind of not too verbose way, which, as you can tell, I struggle with. That would be quite a nice functionality. So yeah, I think that it seems like there are lots of positives. I wonder as well. So in terms of we've kind of, we're dominating the conversation a little bit about ChatGPT. I mean, it's kind of what we suggested that we'd be talking about today. But I guess it's not the only artificial intelligence, machine learning program that's being developed in this way. Is I suppose there's also Microsoft and other organizations as well. Can you tell us a little bit about where it fits in and what they're all doing? If that's...
Yeah. So ChatGPT is part of an organization, or it's developed by an organization called OpenAI, which was initially a non-profit organization, but it has a spin-off which is for-profit, and that's come as a result of the past couple of years. And Microsoft has now bought into it and has a significant stake in it. And I know that they are working on a suite of tools that uses ChatGPT, but they have already been using some of these kind of similar tools to large language models. So, for example, in Microsoft Word, even just now, if you have Microsoft Word, you can paste in a video and tell it, give me a transcript of the video, and it will do that. And Google Docs has also recently, released Bard, which is a kind of competitor to ChatGPT, but they've also had in their emails and in their GDocs, for a while now, they've had like an autocomplete kind of feature. I don't know if you've noticed that when you're writing emails.
Yeah, it's really good actually, because it's like, that's exactly what I was going to write down. That is really helpful.
And their docs now have that as well. I don't know if it was just me, because it did show up as like, oh, you've been selected to be a beta version of this, so it could just be me, it could just be a select group of people. But yeah, they do have a feature now in Google Docs where it will try to basically predict the rest of your sentence. So they're already using these sorts of things, and we see it. There's also an umbrella of like artificial machine learning tools that are out there that aren't necessarily large language models, but are kind of like cousins thereof. So in research, for example, there's quite a few research tools that will let you find papers that are very similar. Like if you input a paper, it will then try and find cousins of that paper, which kind of shortens like the literature review process. So yeah, there's a whole host of tools out there at the moment. So yeah, it's a really important time to kind of take a step back and take stock and think about why these companies might be interested in doing this, and how they're able to do it, and where they're getting their training data from, and how that impacts us and our privacy.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say we should maybe pause and take stock, because there was quite a high profile letter to was it to just OpenAI, or to generally all the companies to say, look, hold on, whoa, we need some time to think about the ethical implications and getting the framework in place to
Yeah.
to make sure we're ready for this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also clear about why we should take stock. So there's two big letters that went out. There was the letter I think you're speaking of, where they asked everyone to kind of put a pause on all the development and let's take stock of where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that letter kind of fell into the trap of like overhyping things.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily that these tools are really powerful for sure, but they are also it serves ChatGPT, OpenAI, and all these companies really well if we think of these tools as all knowing, right? That's a really good marketing shtick for them to say our tools are so powerful we have to stop developing it,
Right.
because look how powerful it is. When maybe we should take stock just because of like how they're built. So ChatGPT uses some really exploitative labor practices in order to get their work across, and also take stock of like, where are we using this? Why should we use it? Who has access to this? And where does the data come from? I think those are the bigger questions, and those are the real ones that we need to tackle. Yeah.
Okay, oh, that's really interesting. And yeah, you shared, we have some resources, by the way, that we can share around afterwards. I expect we'll maybe post them into the comments afterwards. Michelle very kindly shared about, for example, that you were saying about explosive pretzels and things like that. We've got some links to share about that as well. Yeah, so I think it sounds like you're right. We need to just, because it's difficult when it's a private company, I suppose, that's even if it might be a non-profit or not, it sounds as if there needs to be something in place to address the kind of the implications, and also because I suppose if it was some kind of product that was being developed, for example, I'm trying to think of an analogy, that would create something that would be damaging to the environment, you'd be like, hold on a minute, well, hopefully, you'd hope society would step in and say, whoa, okay, we need to just see about the implications of that, see if there are alternatives and things, like making if we could go back and get rid of all this throwaway plastic, if we knew the implications of that, then you'd hope that they would just say, hold on, you're just going to wrap everything in plastic, let's think about that. So yeah, you'd hope that we'd be kind of reflective enough to think, when there are things potentially like this that have a lot of significant societal implications, we should just wait a minute. But yeah, it's quite tricky. We have a question here, so I'm going to pop it up on the chat overlay, and I hope you can see that, Michelle. We have Edmund. So okay. Oh, sorry. So, Quinton. So we have a question here. I'm wondering your opinion on how you see AI taking over repetitive jobs, for example, admin or tutor jobs and things like that. That's a really great question. Thank you, Quinton. Michelle.
Yeah. So I think the kind of I'm going to reveal a bit my bias here. So I'm definitely like a humanist. I'm not interested in a society ruled by computers. And so there's I don't think there's a way I can answer this question without showing my bias, and so at least I'm going to say it out right before at the gate, so you know where I stand. I don't think there's a problem per se with like repetitive jobs being taken over by AI, but I think we need to center humans first. So it's easy to think that all repetitive jobs are bad and need to be like removed from society. But we've got to remember that there are, we don't know why people have a certain job, why they choose certain jobs. There's so many reasons that go into that. And so I think the danger comes when we say, I'm just going to replace all of it with AI. And not really take a human-centered approach to it and think, but maybe someone wants that job. Like, Yeah. I definitely know that I definitely know PhD students even who have taken like a year out to do like a quote unquote repetitive job just because it's just a nice job sometimes to have, just to take a bit of a mental break from everything, or maybe there are certain abilities that prevent you from taking a not repetitive job. And also, I think we need to be careful about what we call a repetitive job. So, yeah, I don't know. There's jobs that I would consider repetitive. Even as a PhD student, there are repetitive jobs that I have, but it's just part of the job. And yeah, I don't know. Again, as a humanist, I think there's like we've got to keep the range of good and bad. You know, if your job was always good all the time, you wouldn't know how good you have it. Sometimes you do have to do repetitive, boring things, and especially when it comes to tutoring as well. I think it's important to remember that things like learning are some. I can't. No one has convinced me yet that there's no way not to replace learning with humans and human contact and a humanist approach, because I don't think there's another way to learn sometimes than just doing something repetitively over and over and over again. You know, like my times tables. I think times tables, you just have to like learn it over and over and over again. And learning is hard, and sometimes that is what's involved, is just you taking a crack at the problem again and again and again. And that's just, I think that's how humans learn. I don't think we can replace that. And so some repetitive things, I think, we need to recognize where they come from, why they're repetitive, how, you know, maybe if we understood our brain better, we would be able to make it not repetitive so that we have to learn. But as far as I know, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a really, really nice kind of answer you've given there, Michelle. And I think, yeah, like you were saying about the kind of how you define the jobs, but also like how they why people choose the jobs. But I suppose there'll be some adaptation in that making things a little bit easier for people, like we've been saying. You know, maybe taking the kind of the unpleasant or repetitive, if that's unpleasant or whatever,
Mhm.
kind of activities out of doing a job, making it easier for everybody who's doing that. But yeah, I think you're probably right. I mean, surely we'd like to have some and maintain some human interaction. So
Yeah.
even in any role, there should hopefully be some kind of people oriented work there. And I guess if it means that we all work a little bit less, this kind of
Yeah.
heralded 4-day working week, which I noticed, by the way, Digilab supports and has done from the start.
Yeah.
That's very cool. We'd love to work towards that. At the moment, it's just so difficult because there's so much we have to do, and we just don't have enough time to do it in. But we aspire to get to that place. But maybe this is the kind of thing that AI and well, using AI in a kind of broad sense, whether it means that it actually has intelligence or not, or hopefully it'll make our jobs easier and mean that people can have better work-life balances.
Yeah.
That would
Yeah.
be really
To be
positive.
clear, I'm all for that. I would, yeah, absolutely all for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely if there's a way that we can do it where we center humans and don't kick anyone out of the space that wants to be in the space, I think that's important. But
Mm.
yes, definitely I'm all for kind of making things easier, as long as they sort of, I'm gonna have to caveat this, as long as they sort of like stay easier. And I'll use an example of this, which is I saw someone do a cartoon where it was someone getting an email and being like, oh great, I'll use ChatGPT to like shorten this email for me so I don't have to do as much reading.
Mm.
And then someone being like, oh, I'm gonna use ChatGPT to write this email for me so I don't have to do as much writing. And that's where we need to be cautious. If we're getting caught in a loop of like using ChatGPT to do these tasks this way, where it all gets longer and more frustrating and more hours of work, that's where we need to be careful. And I think part of that involves, if you're tempted to use ChatGPT or an AI tool, maybe it's worth asking the question, is there another way I can just make this process easier? So maybe I don't have to write an email. Maybe, I was using this example when I was speaking to administrators at the uni. I was like, maybe we should just not have minutes for a meeting. Like, is there a way we can get around minutes or making minutes as long instead of just turning to the tool in the first place? It just really depends. We've got to think about processes carefully Yeah, and make sure we don't get caught in this loop.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from like minutes and things, I guess with if you have a memory as patchy as mine, it's useful to be like, okay, that's what we actually spoke about. But yeah, like you say, making them, don't use it to make the most verbose and detailed
Mm,
minutes, like you're saying. And yeah, I guess the invention of email has already been. I mean, everyone would say, "Well, it's great. I don't need to pick up a phone. I don't need to go in person or write a letter and send it on a horse to people." You can just send them an email, okay, quick. But actually, it means because it's so quick, because it's so efficient, it means that wait, everybody. I mean, aren't we all just drowning in emails at the moment? And
yeah,
I mean, they're useful. They are useful. But yeah, like you were saying, maybe if we just think, do you actually need to send that email? Is there
yeah,
a way? Because otherwise, yeah, we could get ChatGPT sending emails to people who are receiving it, translating it, and
yeah.
ChatGPT is just doing loads of unnecessary work and of course, I suppose. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the future I want to avoid.
yeah, so I guess it's just with any kind of technology, let's think about it, and also it's worth. I mean, yeah, it kind of I don't know. It's a tricky one, but all of this costs energy as well. And I know that tech companies are moving towards being kind of run by renewables and things like that. But I mean, I suppose every Google search uses an awful lot of energy. ChatGPT is probably using even more energy. I don't know what the numbers are. I'm putting you on the spot here. You're probably going to Google that quickly. I'll just ad lib in the meantime. By the way, this is a great opportunity to say, everybody, please do keep sending questions. So Quinton, thank you so much for your question. And if anybody has any more kind of comments, thoughts, questions, reflections, please post them in the chat, and we will do our best to respond. Yeah. So yeah, in terms of like energy usage of ChatGPT. I don't know if you have any thoughts or
I
ideas.
do. I do. I actually have. I'm trying to load it now, but Overleaf is just dying on me. But I do actually have in my thesis, I have a figure from a report, which I can send the link to you too. I maybe should have done that already. But essentially, it's a report that looked at AI tools across the landscape as they currently are, and looked at the energy usage for them. And quite a scary graph. Oh yes, here it is. So it was an accounting of carbon emission costs measured in tons for various machine learning models versus real life scenarios. So for the for training ChatGPT 3, so not ChatGPT 4, which is the current like new model, that took about 500 tons of CO2. And to put that into context, the average year in the life of an American citizen was like, I think, I'm trying to read this bar chart, but I think it's around like 20 tons.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a lot of energy. Yeah, it's a lot of energy.
So it
And
was did you say 50 tons or 500 tons?
500.
500 tons. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a lot. And you hope they haven't generated that using fossil fuels and things, but
Yeah.
well, I suppose it's a generation of CO2, but yeah, are they offsetting? I mean, although that's another whole nother kettle of fish. Um, okay, yeah, that's quite significant. And I guess we would hope that really overall this is gonna, make our lives a lot easier. And we haven't even touched on the fact that, hypothetically it could be used in scientific research. It could be used for coming up. We're all hoping that it's going to come up with the solution to the fusion problem. If we can have nuclear fusion, oh, it's just because you need to do this. Great. I mean, of course, ChatGPT itself is a language tool, so that's not necessarily, but some kind of artificial intelligence. So I suppose it is worth investing, of course, in this technology because it could, quite literally save the world. But
Yeah.
I mean, there are other we need to think about, there's a lot of I think a lot of climate scientists would say we know how to save the world. We know exactly what to do, and we're just
Yeah.
not doing it because of political issues. So yeah, there's
Yeah.
another kettle of fish to, to discuss there, perhaps. Yeah, I don't. You mentioned as well, by the way, ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 4. I know 4 is the kind of current version, right? What's the difference between that? Because I know there was some, it's quite a big upgrade.
Yeah. So ChatGPT So ChatGPT has been around for quite a while. I think they had their original version, and then there was GPT-2, and then GPT-3, which sort of kind of gained popularity sort of around, I want to say even maybe like September, like the beginning of this academic year. So September 2022. So yeah, and that was yeah, so that was like where people could go and just online for free, put inputs in and get outputs out. And then I believe ChatGPT 4 came out. I want to say maybe like I'm really terrible with dates and times. I think like February or March this year. And it is a lot better. No one can quite confirm this, because of the way. So OpenAI does release scientific papers, but they are. I don't believe all of them are peer reviewed, and some scientific colleagues in the field have had difficulty replicating the results in the papers as well. So that's a point of concern. But essentially, they use the data that they got from people using ChatGPT 3 to release ChatGPT 4. And as well, ChatGPT 4 is currently used in Microsoft's version of. They've got like a search that uses ChatGPT 4, a search function, and the earlier stuff that I was talking about, where they're incorporating it into the like tools that Microsoft Tools uses, will be ChatGPT 4. Yeah, and ChatGPT 4 is, you can also access it, but I think you have to pay for it as a user. And a certain amount of money each month gets you a certain amount of queries on ChatGPT 4. And yeah, it is meant to be a lot better. So it's meant to hallucinate less. Hallucinating the term being where it like makes up data. It's not a term I like because I think it anthropomorphizes it a little bit. Yeah, and yeah, so yeah, that's kind of the main differences between the two and how they evolved.
Brilliant. And it's quite quite an interesting yeah, this term hallucinations, because it seems to, yeah, like you're saying, it implies that it isn't just, I don't know. It's a bit of a loaded term, I suppose. I did see there was a Guardian article about that.
Yeah.
It's yeah, and so it's just making things up sometimes. And this is another reason why we need to be kind of careful what we, don't just take things at face value and what you read. Because it could just make something up. And I think I've seen that people have tried. Someone came up with something that they knew wasn't a thing in science, and then asked it about it, and it turned out to just completely make it up and make up references and things like that. It's a
Yeah.
bit scary.
Yeah, it's a very common thing that it will do. So again, because it's a language model, it's not meant to give you accurate information. It just wants to give you the next words that it thinks belongs next to it. So yeah, so it is prone to making things up, and so a lot of the time, I find this quite funny with student work. Is I'll see this quite often in student work where you can read something that's like very obviously ChatGPT generated, because because if you're the teacher, like you're an expert in the field. Like I know what's real and what's not in my field, and so for me, it's really easy to tell that it's just picking up words that look like that occur often in maybe the same paper or maybe in the same field of science or something like that, and just putting them together, because it's figured out there's a statistical connection between these words. So yeah, that is why we need to be so careful, I think, when we use language like hallucinating or thinking or even referring to it. I mean, I do it. I refer to it as it, but like refer to it as a person, we need to be really careful about that, because when we think, we're not just statistically putting things together. We know things, we learn things, we think about things, and it cannot do that.
Yeah, and I guess, well, I mean, there's a kind of a whole philosophical thing about what we're doing internally on a, are we just doing this but in a really really complicated way, and how does machine learning differ from actual human learning? Because we've got a whole, weird evolution and and various things that are affecting us. Yeah, that's that's a whole nother discussion that we're going to have at some point. I've just noticed there's a comment as well, again from Quinton. Thank you very much for responding there. So I hope I understand this correctly, but is 500 tons significant though based on how many people are using it and the outcome from the training as compared to say 20 tons per lifetime of a US citizen? So yeah, that's an interesting point about, 500 tons versus 20 tons in terms of like the overall benefit. If you were to develop an MRI machine or something, or I don't know, a type of new thing, I suppose maybe, it sounds like a lot, but maybe it's not as much in context. But
yeah, yeah, I totally agree. I am always wary of putting out tons measured in that way of CO2 because it does bring up this question. I guess it's more just that we need to question, like, if we think about the resources that Earth has and we think about, like, what resources we want to use, is that a resource, given that it's a significant chunk in terms of, like, computing, if we have so and so many tons of emissions that we want to spend on computing on the planet, do we want to give those tons to ChatGPT? I don't know. That's like a question that we all have to grapple with. And it really depends, I guess, on what you see the value of ChatGPT to society and like the drawbacks, the advantages. So yeah, I think it really depends on that.
And I suppose with this training, the kind of the 500 tons figure, I mean, I guess, I don't know, is that the kind of continuous use? So, for example, every time you ask a question or ask an
Yeah,
inquiry to it, it doesn't account for that. So that's like
yeah,
so, like with every Google search uses however many, I can't
yeah.
remember what the,
Yeah, so there's going to be additional costs with it
yeah,
for every time you use it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I
that's
suppose,
training.
so I suppose it's like anything. I mean, using the internet for looking up cat videos and stuff like that. You're using energy to do so. Could we use that energy for something else? And therefore, asking ChatGPT to write a poem in the form of some kind
Yeah.
of cartoon character, it could there be better uses. So yeah, I mean, there's that kind of consideration. But yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, the point there about the 500 tons, but in terms of the training, it's probably not that much. But yeah, like you're right. Overall, in terms of how we're inventing something new that could consume loads of energy.
Mm.
Obviously, the benefits probably in that outweigh the cost. But yeah, hopefully everyone's moving towards renewable energy generation in terms of the server rooms and
Yeah.
things like that too. We have another question as well from Dan. Thank you very much, Dan. So as a software engineer, are there any machine learning, AI, LLM, that's actually an abbreviation, I'm not sure, maybe LLM tools that you use or could use to help you develop similar tools? Could we live in a world where AI is developing AI? It's a really great question. And what is
Um,
LLM? Maybe you can.
oh, I think that's large language model. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Okay. I should know that.
So could we live in a world where, I think there are some, so I suppose like some argument could be made for like unsupervised learning being already AI, developing AI. So I know, I was going to say I know, but maybe I'll change this to I think Boston Dynamics and some of the other kind of robotics AI development companies have developed something where like an AI teaches itself how to walk, that sort of thing in like a virtual space. But often this tends to be very hard to reproduce for other scientists. So at the moment, I think I've mentioned this briefly before, but at the moment we're really facing a struggle where a lot of papers will come out in the computer science field saying, "Oh, we've managed to do this," or "We've managed to accomplish this with our model." And a key part of science is always reproducibility. So, can another team come in and do that as well? If so, that kind of indicates that there was something behind that, and there was like a logical, structured reason for that. And at the moment, with AI tools, a lot of scientists are really struggling to reproduce this, and it's a big problem in the field. So yeah, we have had some instances of AI teaching AI. Um, yeah, like I said, they weren't able to reproduce this in other teams, so who knows like how reliable that is, I suppose. In terms of like as a software engineer, I know quite a few, maybe not for maybe not on the big scale, but on a smaller scale, I know some people using AI tools, just like helping them with their own coding and things like that, which is definitely possible to do. But it kind of really, results may vary on how good your outputs are, of course. So you might be coding something and realize that it's completely wrong because ChatGPT spat something out that was wrong or something like that. I personally don't use any of these tools for my own
You
reasons.
don't use ChatGPT at all?
No.
Interesting, interesting. Why is that? Okay, this is where it's a slight deviation, but I'm just
Yeah.
interested.
I don't feel comfortable with it. I see a lot of examples of it. I've used it with other people that have accounts, but I've never made my own account. Maybe that's cheating. I don't know. um, but yeah, I don't use it. I feel quite strongly about the exploited labor that was used to produce it. I don't think that's right. And I just kind of personally didn't have ever felt the need to use it. I love writing. I'm really verbose, as you know. So on a personal level, I don't feel the need to use it. Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. So, but yeah, obviously you know an awful lot about it, and we're grateful that you're kind of sharing your expertise. It's really nice to have the point of view of a software engineer who probably will encounter these tools just in the work you're doing. So yeah,
Mm,
that's great. And thanks again, Dan, for the question there. Hopefully that answered it for you. And that response from Michelle. Please do send more questions through if you have any. It's great to have that kind of interaction because otherwise it's just me me asking my questions, and we'll go off on various tangents as a result. So yeah, please do ask any more. I guess so. It's quite interesting the comments that you've made about the fact that you actually enjoy writing and I suppose in a way the chat gpt, the fact that it's a language model, it could kind of take the fun out of that, or maybe even the thing I'm worried about, and you've mentioned this with students and the use of them
mm,
pretty much just using it for their homework and their coursework and stuff like that. There's a certain element of sometimes you just in order to function properly in society, to have a job and things like this, you need to be able to
mm,
write coherently. You need to have be able to express your ideas clearly and succinctly, and there are certain things that you need to do that maybe things like ChatGPT could, if misused, take away those kind of skills from people.
mm.
I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments about that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. Please stop me if I start rambling. Yeah, so yeah, I definitely think that it can definitely be a crutch. And for some people, yeah, maybe you'll never want to be a writer or you never will enjoy it. And so I'm never gonna be that person. So it's hard for me to see that point of view. I will say though that as a kid, I was convinced I was terrible at math. I almost got held back a grade because of it. And eventually I just I don't know, I just kind of had to keep plugging away at it because I had to pass because it was like a legal requirement. and and eventually it just something just clicked in my brain, and I went from wanting to be a journalist to doing a PhD in astrophysics. So there's something to be said there as well, that learning, it's about learning the skill, but it's also about finding what you like and what speaks to you, and how you interact with that and how you develop as a person because of that. And so I would just caution students who use it in that way, or anyone who uses it in that way as a crutch, to just think, what am I missing out on? Because and that's easy for me to say when I don't have a coursework deadline haunting me over the horizon. I totally get that. I get that. I really do. Um, yeah. So there's that element of it, and then there was something else I was going to say. I completely forgotten.
I
Uh,
was just going to say, in terms of hopefully universities and colleges are kind of responding to this already, and
mm,
hopefully they're already recognizing that students are probably using it, and it just means we're going to have to change the way we do coursework now, because it's almost as if I mean, okay, so calculators, I remember
Yeah.
back in the olden days when you had to be careful about the calculators you'd taken, or or even taking mobile phones in when they got more capable, and into exams and things, and they'd have to put in place things like, well, no, you have to put your mobile phone at the front or lock it in your bag or whatever, and it'll be checked if you were going to go for a loo break in an exam or something like that. So it's just like another thing that schools and universities, if they don't have enough to worry about now, have to implement to consider that. But yeah, I guess we had tools as well. I'm just thinking from the physics
Mhm.
undergrad. There's this wonderful thing called Wolfram Alpha, which was extremely helpful with maths calculations. Although it wasn't 100%, it wouldn't necessarily tell you all the answers, but it could sometimes actually be quite helpful to just, you're really
Mhm.
stuck, and it's like with anything, if you're cheating at trying to get fit, you can't really do it. Sometimes you just gotta
Yeah.
work hard. You've got to put the effort in, as passing exams or doing anything like that. You've got to put the work in. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
hopefully people recognize that as students as well. It's
I
on
hope
our minds.
so.
Mm.
And this is another thing where, like, I feel like we're at a real turning point where, you know, why is there so much pressure on students? Why are students turning towards it? And we can really, like, at the moment, universities are so marketized, and academics are really struggling to provide, like, to have the time to provide, like, good courses. And that's not on them, it's because of this marketization of universities. And so at the moment, like, we are at a crossroads where we're saying, oh, there's this tool that can, like, write essays and stuff. So what does that mean for, like, the value of an essay?
Mhm.
And so we do have the capability now. I think we have the opportunity now to think and sit back and think, what does this mean to us? Why do we learn it? How do we learn it? How, and, like, can, we push back on this marketization of universities so that academics can create, creative assessments, or assessments that dig deeper, or, and so that students don't feel pressured to, want to do these things, and not want to use, like, cheating through ChatGPT and things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've got, it's like an opportunity here. I think of it as an opportunity. Yeah.
It kind of reminds me a little bit, during COVID, when universities had to develop online teaching, when you can do things face to face, and there was this whole issue of like, well, can we even operate a university in the same way? I mean, our students not going to turn up to lectures anymore because they just watch the recordings, and
Yeah.
should we just operate online fully and in future? But I think things like that, you recognize the value of in-person teaching and
Mhm.
having the human contact like we've spoken about, but also in this case it's like they have the value of actually doing the learning that you're supposed to learn to get a degree to um, to
Yeah.
pass the course. So
Yeah.
yeah, hopefully it's yeah, the concerns hopefully are just, it'll balance out and people will do the right thing, whatever that is. But yeah, like you say, maybe we need to reconsider like the way that people learn, and
Mhm.
if it's not like, is there a way that we can improve it? Is there a way that we can use this tool for good, but also making sure that people do get a degree or a qualification or anything like that they've
Mhm.
actually worked for in a good way.
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
so we've had another comment, thank you very much, and it's Quinton again. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pop it on the screen. I'm going to zoom my, I wish I brought my glasses. I wonder if ChatGPT could be a good application as innovative communication tool. So it's just helping people go through bereavement or learning a foreign language, or regional or novel language. This is something actually we spoke about at the start, the
Mhm.
potential for it to be used as a tool for kind of for alternative uses like this, like language learning and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I love the idea of it being used for, like, learning a regional language, because I'm thinking, and the reason why is because there's an LLM that recently came out, from a specific, I hope I pronounce this correctly, Maori, the native peoples of Australia.
Oh, Maori? Is that right?
Maori,
Oh,
yes,
is that
Maori.
New Zealand? Okay. Oh,
New Zealand. Oh yeah.
it's
Oh gosh, I'm really butchering it now.
all we know is physics and non-geography.
Yeah, so, and they have, like, a very rare and unique language. And what they've done is they've created a collective, like, community LLM, And so that is like specifically for so that there's like cultural rules around them using their language. I think you have to like be there's something to do with like a ceremony with tribal elders in order to use the language and to provide the teachings for that language. And so they created their own cooperative LLM in order, and that has helped preserve their language, and it's also been built with their community in mind. So, OpenAI, it's like a very it's got this confusing nonprofit for profit. It's clearly marketing, it's clearly taking data from consumers, it's scraping data from the internet without compensating the consumers for it. And that's kind of like one model or a way to do AI tools. And then the other model is this Maori model, where they are really building this cooperative community like asset and tool, and that could definitely like I think they have permissions like kind of similar to Creative Commons license where anyone can use it, but you have to credit these tribal elders, and it is really built with them in mind and with their cultural practices in mind, and it's a really respectful, ethical language model, and that is something that is quite cool. If we can do that for these unique indigenous languages, or even my dialect in German is like I think 1 in 10,000 speakers. There's only 10,000 speakers of it, and that's even in Germany. So for these kind of like native niche languages, I think it would be beautiful if we could create these ethical tools to use it and help other people learn this language and to preserve this language. In terms of like things like more emotional things like bereavement, again, as someone who really believes in the power of like human to human contact, I'm not sure that's the best idea, mainly because with tools like this, there's no these tools don't have their own agency. And if something goes wrong, if the tool goes haywire and actually worsens the bereavement, where does that person go for justice in that situation, or that person's family? So we
So
had
I suppose would this be effectively, I don't know what the context would be. Would that be I mean, I suppose if you were using it to kind of how to phrase something that's difficult to express to someone, then that kind of thing might be helpful. But yeah, I suppose you're not necessarily relying on it to do your communications for you or something like that, which would
yeah,
be could be disastrous or very
yeah.
upsetting to people.
And even if you're using it to express condolences to someone as
Mm.
opposed to the person bereaved seeking help,
Oh,
we also have to be careful on how that's going to be received on the other person's behalf. How would you feel if you learned that someone's really heartfelt, beautiful card was actually written by essentially a chatbot? That's also really hurtful, and can be quite hurtful. There was a case of this in America where there was unfortunately multiple gun fatalities on a campus at a university, and the university sent out a statement that was generated by ChatGPT, and many students ended up protesting because it was just really hurtful to them that this university couldn't provide their own words in this scenario. And yeah, so that's something we need to be really careful about.
yeah, it's tricky, and of course, you know, sometimes it's not very clear if things are being written by ChatGPT, and it's not as if there's
Mhm.
some kind of watermark or anything that you can tell. I mean, maybe there's a way that you could work it out through other algorithms or something like that. Is that how they found out, or did the university just a bit of a tangent? Did the university kind of say this has been generated by ChatGPT, which is
I think there was like something in the end of the statement that was like, "Oh, this was generated by ChatGPT."
oh, okay. Or maybe they copied in the next response or something like that,
Yeah,
maybe, or
yeah.
something. Or, yeah, that's tricky, isn't it? And yeah, I think you're right. It's kind of in those kind of situations, it's I suppose with anything really, if you were to take yeah, like a generic response from, how do I say happy birthday to someone on Google, and they say this, then it's kind of the same thing, and then you,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a tricky business. I noticed, by the way, we've had another comment. Callum, thank you very much. saying that on the topic of communication tool, companies like Duolingo are systematically losing stock values. The average investor seems to think so. So it seems as if GPT models will supersede many language tools. It's quite an interesting
Yeah.
idea. So maybe because of the way it's being trained, it could.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it could, instead of Duolingo? I really like that the example you used about that, ethical development of a. I think it's Maori, as in
Sorry.
indigenous to mainland New Zealand. I think. Is
Yes.
that
Yeah.
what yeah. Yeah. So the Maori people have developed. That's a really really nice example. And yeah, maybe things like Duolingo or other kind of language learning tools could use this in future. But
Mhm.
yeah, but at the same time, yeah, I really like the ethical model, and it's interesting. So this is kind of going back a little bit, but thinking about the so it's open AI, right? And you said there is a non-profit aspect, but at the same time there's some kind of black boxness to it because there's a commercial element.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's tricky. So there are certain, for example, to make everything completely open source would be really tricky,
Mm.
time consuming, and potentially difficult. I'm thinking, hypothetically, all our stuff, if we put all of our documents half done, not complete, just our thoughts, our ramblings and stuff. If we put them all online, we could do that, and we want to be as transparent as possible. We want to put everything that's useful online, but if we put everything online, that might make it a bit difficult for us to operate, or that it's really tricky. So I'm thinking for something like this, though, for a tool like you're saying, it's been trained on the internet, and that not
Mm.
necessarily crediting all of the contributors, the words that are on there. Or, I don't suppose they gave their permission for it, although perhaps by putting it on the internet, they're giving their permission somehow. I don't know. We didn't exactly sign a disclaimer when we started using the internet. So, or it's yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a tricky one. So it's not entirely open as it could be.
No, and there's, like you say, there's definitely a balance to be struck with like open source code or not open source code. That's for sure. But there's also, and I didn't even know about this until recently, but there's also ways that you can get around that. So I mentioned earlier how there's this reproducibility issue in academia. And that came from a specific paper, and that paper made some recommendations to get around the issue of, my code's really messy. I don't have the time. I'm not being paid to make it open source. I'm really struggling to make it open source. And there is a way around that. There's a few technical ways to get around that. And one of them is Dockerization. So that's something that companies can do where essentially you take a snapshot on your computer of the program and when it's working. And you can then upload that. And then when that person downloads it, it's essentially like they get a little sandbox of that computer at that time that the screenshot was taken.
Mhm.
Um, so there are technical ways around it, but I do understand OpenAI's concerns about making things public, or fully public, I should say. Um, but yeah, I think when you're working with all this data that you've taken from the internet, you do have some kind of responsibility towards the public, and the general public, because that's what the internet is kind of for, right? It's for the general public. In many countries, it's being seen more and more as like a public utility,
Mhm.
so like a human right to have this. So yeah, I think there's a certain level of like ethical, moral responsibility that these companies hold if they're using this kind of publicly sourced data.
Interesting. So it's almost as if they need some kind of oversight panel or something, like a
Mhm.
community. Like how we as a charity, we have trustees who
Yes.
we allow access to everything that we have, and they're kind of overseeing that we're running things appropriately, and things like that. So yeah, I think maybe some kind of equivalent. I don't know if they have that already. Perhaps I don't know.
Yes, yeah. So this is a recommendation that actually came out of Ada Lovelace Institute made a report recently, and they suggested exactly this: that
Mhm.
for both companies and for university research as well, having something like an ethical review board, similar to the way medical review boards work. When you're doing research on medical things, you can't just I don't know, electrocute every bunny that you come across. You have to like, you have to get approval ethically to do your experiments.
Yeah.
And in the same way, these ethical review boards would kind of work the same way.
Yeah.
So there are frameworks that exist for doing this type of thing ethically.
Mhm.
And it is notable that a lot of companies that make money off of machine learning models or tools in some way, so this could be OpenAI, this also includes things like Roombas and, the Hoover that works automatically. You know,
Hold on, the what on the who what was that?
Roombas, the like vacuums that like the Hoovers that are like robot vacuums.
Oh, like robot vacuum cleaners. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I know.
So, so companies like that use machine learning models in some way, whether that's the software itself or whether it's hardware that uses that kind of software, it's they need to make sure that they're using these kind of ethical safeguards, and it's notable that in a lot of cases where people have or where companies have violated um, ethical or data privacy boundaries, they've fired. You'll notice that in the timeline of them releasing their product, and a couple of weeks beforehand, they'll have fired people who protested or who were on the ethical review board. So this is like a very noticeable pattern in startups, that is something that the general public could, needs to be aware of. Yeah.
Okay, I had no idea about that. Maybe this is something that, again, we can share, links and things at the end. And we'll do a kind of list of references and bits and pieces here. It was really interesting, like you were saying. And my brain's just gone blank. Why to do that all of a sudden? When we were talking about the kind of oversight that the public potentially, or even a group of experts or somebody who's not vested financially or whatever in the organization. I mean, wouldn't it be great if everything was running that way? Just in the same way that we have for legal disputes or something, we have a jury. That why don't we have something equivalent for I'm not going to get political now, but hypothetically, anything like a government decision or a kind of a big decision that affects everybody else. So in the same way, like this is potentially really significant for society. Why don't we have some kind of transparent process, even if it isn't shared with literally everybody on the planet, but there are people who've maybe signed some kind of non-disclosure agreement or something which says that they won't share everything, but they're going to be a kind of advisor or some kind of making sure that things are done properly, fairly, ethically.
Yeah,
That would be really
absolutely.
nice. But yeah, I guess you kind of hope that the work is going that way. You hope. We've had a couple more comments. Thank you very much, Quinton, for your comments. And okay, a little bit of a clarification because I was a bit confused as well about the use of, for example, ChatGPT or other kind of language tools for bereavement. You've clarified that basically speaking, emulating, say, a deceased grandparent or something, and using the chat process. So that's I mean, that's like a big ethical thing. We almost need a philosopher or a kind of,
I think there's a Black Mirror episode on this.
yeah.
That's more than I ever could about it.
Yeah, because that could be quite, that's tricky to contemplate. But yeah, at the same time, it's many ethical concerns about that. But yeah, great, a great idea. And yeah, things that, again, like we've been saying, that maybe we need to have things in place. I mean, it's interesting. So for the past I don't know how many years I've been subscribing to them, but 80,000 hours. They're a really great kind of non-profit. They're doing some great work about the kind of things that what can we do to solve the world's most pressing problems? How can you have the biggest impact? And this is kind of why I went down this path actually to set up the Exeter Science Centre. Not that they suggested doing something like this, but I thought this was missing, and therefore I wanted to do it. So they've been talking about AI safety and things like that for a long time. And I know that there are a lot of, there's a lot of research that's going on into AI safety and implications of AIs. But yeah, it's interesting that there had to be that letter that was sent around, and you said there was another one as well that was like, hold on, whoa, let's just stop a minute. kind of it makes me a bit upset that there aren't already the kind of frameworks in place. Or maybe there are. Maybe they're just like, hey, just like climate scientists, you're not listening to us. This is what you need to do to make it safe or to not burn up the planet. This is, yeah, I don't know. I guess the information's already out there. Do you think, and that
Yeah.
these companies aren't listening, or there's no legal implications for them to.
Yeah, I think it's more that than anything. So a lot of the research I've been doing recently on the ethics of it has come from a specific group of researchers, not like by intention, but I just kept coming across these names again and again and again. And one of them was actually, like I mentioned before, so a lot of times before a company releases a product that is like ethically kind of questionable, you'll notice that a trend is that they tend to fire people whose job is to tell them that it's unethical. And one of these people is Timnit Gebru, who is a co-author on the letter. I don't know if you posted the links already.
Oh, not
But,
yet, no.
oh, okay. Well, in one of the letters, which will be in the resources afterwards that I posted, she's a co-author on one of those on that letter, and she and her fellow researchers I keep them running into in this field have been talking about this for years, years really, and I think their most kind of important paper on this topic came out, I want to say 2 years ago, maybe. Like I said, I'm terrible with dates, so I could be wrong with this. But it's been being spoken about for years, and it is a case of politicians not really understanding what's going on in terms of technology. I mean, we saw this back in the um, United States when there was committee hearings on Facebook's involvement with Cambridge Analytica and election manipulation. Their congressman's questions to Mark Zuckerberg were almost ludicrous sometimes, where you think like, oh, you barely know what an internet connection is. How can you govern on these really complex technological data and privacy questions? And so that's something, yeah, I think the answers are out there. I think people have been thinking about this for a long time. Research has been done in this area. It's more just politicians really need to get up to speed, yeah, and it's really shocking how tech companies work. I think a lot of people, even I, get surprised sometimes when I'm doing research in this area or reading about it, and I'm like, oh my god, they did what? And I had no idea they were taking this data from me. Yeah, so yeah, it's a hard topic to keep on top of because so much happens, and we're so encompassed by technology all the time. But yeah, politicians need to get a little bit better on this topic.
Yeah, hopefully there's plenty of kind of advice, and yeah, I know that there are certain advisors that are contributing to that, and I think actually Roger next week will be pretty speaking about that in a lot more detail. So yeah, it's a really it's really important, and I think it's something that, yeah, it's all moving quite quickly. I mean, ChatGPT was kind of released, like you were saying, like last year, and since then, lots of things have been happening. So, yeah, I mean, this is why we're so grateful that you've taken the time to chat with us and offer your expertise and insights about this. By the way, everyone, I have posted the links that Michelle has shared with us in the chat. I have no idea if it's being formatted or if it's just being pasted in one massive blob. It was formatted when I posted it in there, but hopefully you've got some links there and some suggested. I don't know if it's just posted twice. I think it might have posted twice. I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, hopefully there are some links there that you can follow up on. There's some suggested kind of books, as well as links, of course. I don't know whether we need to say a disclaimer of, we don't necessarily, we haven't written any of the links there, but these are just hopefully further reading that you might find interesting. So I guess this is just a kind of call out for any further last questions to ask Michelle, but otherwise we'll kind of wrap up, I suppose, and summarize what we've spoken about so far. We've spoken about loads, and I haven't been keeping notes, so I'm just going to try and go from the top of my head and recall the kind of logic and the things we've spoken about, and feel free, Michelle, to chip in or correct me if I've forgotten things. So we started off talking about machine learning and AI and what it's all about, and the fact that machine learning really is just a process that computers, machines go through to learn, improve, and get better by taking information in and getting some kind of, was that good, was that correct, and keep repeating that process. Artificial intelligence is a bit of a uncertain thing, that whether ChatGPT is intelligent or not. I mean, most people, I think, are saying it's not. We shouldn't treat it as such, and we need to be careful. And that's a lot of the discussion we've been having about the fact that we need to maybe treat this with care in terms of the way it's developed. And Michelle, you've made that a really important point about the data that it's taken, the way that it's been trained, and the the way it's been developed, but also in the way we use it in terms of the energy it's consuming, perhaps is a consideration, but also the kind of, not taking it at face value, because it isn't necessarily gospel, to use it, to not be able to think of a better word. It's not factual, perhaps. It's not some kind of I shouldn't have used gospel, really, because yeah, it's not factual from a kind of scientific perspective. They might not it might not be giving you accurate things. It could be either making it up, hallucinating, or it could be just getting incorrect data because it's been trained from the internet. What else did we speak about? We spoke about so many things. The potential as well to for it to be something really positive for society, for individuals, to make their lives a bit easier. There are, of course, negative implications as well. Potentially, it could be that we have, there could be things that either it might have difficult kind of ethical implications if it's used in the wrong way, and therefore not written by you. It's written by the machine, and is that as meaningful as if it was written by you, and thoughtfully and considerately to the person who's receiving the information. That's another thing. Wow, we've covered a lot, haven't we? Any other bits that I've missed out there, that because my brain is slowly running out of steam?
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. Yeah, covered a lot of ground. Yeah, but there's lots of ground to cover. There's so much. Something like this, it touches almost every aspect of what we do. Writing, communication, that's the foundations of civilization. So, yeah, a lot of implications from that, from being a student to working as an administrator, working a repetitive job. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if my computer's frozen. It looks like it has on my screen, which is probably no. Okay, well, it's probably telling me that we've spoken for long enough. Alice has said there as well in the chat. Thanks so much for your questions. Do feel free to put things again in the comments. So we would love to have any further questions because of course you can rewatch this as many times as you'd like, of course, and maybe we'll even ask ChatGPT to transcribe it in the end or something afterwards, to make my life easier, because most of the time I go through the transcribing, and Alice does too, for our YouTube videos. So we'll see if we can make that a little bit easier for ourselves. But of course we'll check it, because that's sensible practice with using something like this. But basically, that's a really long-winded way of saying, if you have any further questions, please do post them in the comments, or send them to us on social media, because we would love to either try and respond. And perhaps, Michelle, putting you on the spot here, but would you be happy with any follow-up questions?
Absolutely, yeah. Ask me anything.
Fantastic, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And again, if you have any questions for Roger, again next week we'll have the opportunity to take any more questions. And Roger will be joining us as basically an expert from the kind of AI and ethics point of view. And yeah, he's a responsible AI advisor, and also the former chair at the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation. So please do tune in next week, next Thursday, 7 o'clock in UK British summertime again. But yeah, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you very much for questions. Thanks, Alice, for monitoring the chat as well. And Michelle, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And that's the end of the live stream. Tune in next Thursday, 7 o'clock. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.